It's planning time, and these two history teachers have about 90 minutes set aside to write next Monday's lesson. Teacher A sets out to plan a historical reenactment of Appomattox Courthouse. She does detailed research into historically accurate costumes, gets some fake beards from the drama department, and collects materials for a cardboard and aluminum foil saber for General Lee. By the end of the reenactment, it's clear that the teacher spent a lot of time planning the activity. But while it's obviously generating plenty of passion and engagement, we can't be sure in what direction this passion is taking the students' thinking. Some kids might be engaged in productive and rigorous thought, but others, well, others might not. Here's Teacher B. He starts out not by planning an activity, but rather by asking himself a question about how best to get his kids to interact with some key themes in his unit. He also comes up with the idea for a historical reenactment, but in his version, kids have to analyze primary and secondary source records of the event before they role-play. Then, they give each other feedback on how faithful they were to the characters of Grant and Lee based on what they read. And after getting feedback, they role-play again, and finally do some writing from the point of view of their character. Our lesson planning minis will be helpful to folks who think more like Teacher B. They're organized around two basic intellectual habits of planning. First, your lessons have a standards-based end goal in mind, and you think backwards to plan how you're going to get students to that specific end goal. And second, you start by planning what your students will be thinking about rather than what they'll be doing. We think a lesson plan should function sort of like a good piece of software. Done right, it will help the brain be able to function in an amazing and intentional new way. But if you're planning activities rather than thinking, a lesson that works one way for you could work very differently for your students. And if you don't have an end goal in mind, your lesson will lead students in an array of directions, some more valuable than others. And you're responsible for driving learning in all of your kids. The following minis in this sequence will guide you through applying these intellectual habits to lesson planning. They won't teach you to lesson plan from scratch. Not exactly. For one thing, we imagine you already have lesson plans. It's also a very complicated endeavor that will look quite different for, say, first grade art and 10th grade algebra. But if these habits reflect your attitudes, our planning minis will give you a framework that you can use to ensure that your lessons will work as intended for each of your students.